Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I bring on Dr. Stephan Poulter. Dr. Poulter is a renowned Los Angeles-based clinical psychologist in private practice with over 30 years experience. He brings a unique perspective to his practice and writings as a former law enforcement officer, seminary graduate, and ordained minister. Dr. Poulter has authored 7 books, such as The Shame Factor, The Father Factor, The Mother Factor, Your X Factor, The Art of Successful Failure, and Father Your Son. His professional directive is always to help diagnose, treat, and understand the power of our relationship world. His newest book, The Shame Factor, is a culmination of over 20,000 hours of in-person clinical experience addressing the insidious nature of shame. Dr. Poulter works with a wide range of people along with specializing in the father-son, father-daughter relationships and our relationship to psychology and spirituality. Dr. Poulter is married and the father of 4 children. In this episode, Dr. Poulter and I discuss the beginnings of shame and how shame impacts men in their lives. Dr. Poulter explains how he addresses shame in the various chapters of his book, The Shame Factor. We also discuss some of the ways we can normalize conversations around shame. Please find Dr. Poulter on Instagram at Dr. Stephan_Poulter_. And please leave a 5-star review at the end of the episode. I would truly appreciate it. All right, Dr. Stephan Poulter, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited for our conversation, and I'm super grateful for you to take the time and have this conversation with me. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell the listeners what it is that you do and what you're all about.
Thank you, Farm. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in practice for a long time and work with primarily men. I do work with women also, but primarily men. And one of the things we deal with, I just put it up, is the shame factor for men.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of stuff going on right now about men's mental health. And I tell guys, let's deal with shame. If I talk to 6 guys, 3 of them will tell me they don't have shame. What are you talking about? And
Mhm.
shame is the malaise that we feel about ourselves. It can come out as fear of embarrassment. It can come out as imposter syndrome. But a lot of guys, uh, their mental health, they don't really give it much time, where women do because they want to have babies. I think
Mhm.
when you don't want to have a child, there's a part of you, you've got to stay connected. I think with a lot of
Right.
men, we get disconnected. So that's kind of what I thought we'd talk about today. Things that really disconnect us from our
Yeah.
best selves. And
Absolutely, and thank you for touching on that, and, I guess how long have you been doing your work for? You're based in California, but where
Yeah, Los
exactly?
Angeles. Yeah, Los Angeles, and, living just south of the airport, by the beach, um, have 4 children and, and 4 dogs. Don't judge me for that. And we have a beagle. But I find that, before that, in my prior life, I was a policeman for 8 years, from age 23 to 31. That was an education that I had no idea how valuable it was, working with
Mhm.
people, and uh, went to seminary, got a master's degree in theology, adult development, and realized I really want to work with people more outside of that domain. And I've been in
Mhm.
practice now for 30 years in private practice uh, in Westlake, which is right over by UCLA in Westwood, California.
Very cool, very cool. Thank you for sharing that, and, yeah, I think let's jump right into it. Like, shame is, obviously a
Yeah.
huge, topic, and I've covered shame to a certain extent, and the biggest thing is, I've read a lot of work by Brene Brown too, and she met points out that shame often thrives on hiding it and not talking about it, right? And for men, that's such a huge issue. Before we were talking offline, I did mention that
Hmm.
I've been doing a lot of research recently and working on a paper around how shame manifests itself, especially if we've had childhood trauma or failures along the way. Especially for men, there's an aspect of keeping it a secret, which only perpetuates that cycle further. What's your experience been with shame, and why is it something that you believe is important to talk about, especially when it comes to men?
I, That's a great point, Vargam, is that probably 30 years ago, there was an article came out about the same time John Bradshaw's book came out, you know, Healing the Shame Within You. And
Hmm.
this theorist, this psychologist felt that the reason why therapy doesn't work, because we're not talking about shame. And I
Right.
believe shame is its own diagnostic tree is there may be shame, depression, anxiety, but I really believe that shame is the hub. It's kind of like in our deepest secrets, our deepest meanings. And what Brene Brown is, I completely agree with her. Shame cannot tolerate exposure.
Hmm.
And our greatest secrets, many times, is the things we're most shameful about. Now, I've had people say, "What's can't shame be useful?" We're not talking about that. Like, I feel that's more guilt. I feel ashamed that I
Hmm.
yelled at somebody or I forgot to pay something, or I was rude to my neighbor. That's more guilt. Shame is the best thing, like in a marble vase or a pillar, you can see all these grains, different veins running through it. That's shame. It's insidious inside of us. It's not outside. It's not action related. It's feeling related. It's a belief related. And you talked about childhood trauma. Many times, problem with kids, all of us, is before the age of 10, when something happens at home, it's our fault.
Hmm.
Before age 10, kids tend to internalize family trauma as their own trauma. It has
Right.
nothing to do with them. Dad loses his job, foreclosure, parents get divorced. On some level, it's the kid's fault.
Mm.
And because of that, many times it grows into, if I was good enough, that wouldn't have happened. And
Right.
that's where it all starts. When John Bradshaw, Renee Brown, Wayne Dyer, they all talk about it being insidious, meaning it just digs in. It gets into our,
Hmm.
you know, the Catholics may call it sin. Uh, in India, they may call it delusion. But at the end of the day, it disconnects us from ourselves. It's like all roads lead to Rome. And
Right.
I tell men, if you're going to go to therapy, I get asked, what should I talk about? Talk about shame. Because if you're talking about that, you're going to hit, if you don't hit 100% of it, you'll hit 90. And the
Hmm.
other 10%, take care of itself. So I don't
Right.
be so, why don't, when you hear the word shame, what comes to mind? What would be a working definition for you? Or,
Well, when I hear the word shame,
yeah, what comes to mind? I'm looking for the definition I wrote.
well, I remember just growing up and being told shame on you, right? So it's like, to me, it was
Yeah.
always like, oh,
Mm-mm.
uh, it was just always this something I've done that's shameful, and I need to be like regretful for it. And then I started
Mm.
identifying with these things about myself, whether it was not performing in school or misbehaving or doing something that wasn't accepted by my parents. So all of those things started becoming shameful. And then I started repressing those parts of myself. And to
Mhm.
your point, I started disassociating with those parts of myself. And then because they were repressed, they would show up in different ways. And for me, often it showed up as anger as an adult, or
Mhm.
I, I would project those feelings or emotions that I thought were shameful onto other people. And until I didn't really like sit down and start sifting through all of it, I
Yeah.
didn't realize what's going on. It just kept manifesting itself as different, um, I
Y
guess, different emotions and problems.
no, absolutely, what you just said, uh, I'm gonna hitchhike. Um, Shame is a primary emotional wound. It's not a secondary belief. It's not based on a particular action. It's more of a paralyzing emotional, psychological state of mind that distorts the view of ourselves and the world and preventing us from developing a loving sense of self and impairing our ability to form safe and secure relationships because of the chronic state of being discovered as a phony fraud or as an imposter.
Mhm.
It's like you're you're training, you're telling me that, an engineer. Shame short circuits our wiring for systematic growth,
Mhm.
developmental like Erickson go through these different stages. Shame just wires it, and we're off balance. The imbalance
Right.
sets in. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and as a young boy, many times we'll say to our parents, "I've been guilty," "Shame on you." That's more of a guilt-driven where but after a while, we feel defective. That's where the road starts, the fork in the road.
Right.
And many
Right.
men going down later on in life, I see guys in their late teens, they're controlling, they're kind of thugs, bullies, they're harsh on their girlfriends. I'm always thinking, who in your life had you feeling defective? Because you're trying to offset that by controlling people, controlling circumstances, and being aggressive. It's all
Right.
coming from the same wound within you.
Yeah. 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 And that's such an important distinction. And I think so. One of the things I was curious about, because men repress their emotions and they struggle with expressing their emotions, whereas women are more comfortable talking about their emotions. I believe shame shows up differently for men and women, but how is it that women react to shame and men react to shame differently based on your experience? I just wanted to throw that out there.
It's interesting. I think women struggle with shame as much as men do, but it's different. Women
Hmm.
tend to internalize it, men externalize it.
Yeah.
I mean, in in North America, I know sure up in Canada, United States, I think if it's not 100% mass murderers are men, then it's 99.9. There
Hmm.
might have been one woman that took a gun someplace, but men externalize their rage. Women internalize it. Anorexia, eating disorders, uh, uh, depression, just many different. It's more internal, self-loathing,
Right.
self-hatred. Where men will offset that, and every one of these mass shootings, uh, mental health issues, men who feel disenfranchised from their coworkers, from people. Women don't
Hmm.
do that. They take it as that they're bad. Men say, "Well, I'm bad, but I'm gonna take it out on you."
Mm.
Two big, very big distinctions. Very different.
Right. Right. And it's all coming from the same place. It's
Same,
the same place.
exactly. Same source, like you said. Yeah. And women internalize it, men externalize, and that is research bears that to be unfortunately very true.
Right. Right. And so, we touched on shame, and I appreciate you kind of giving that definition as well. But, we were also talking about offline, like what are some of the ways that shame is maintained in our lives? And some of the ways I've felt I've done that is, whether it's perfectionism,
Hmm.
avoidance, just keeping myself busy so I don't have to face those things that I'm hiding or running from. But what are some of the other ways that you've seen, or at least you've highlighted in your book around how people maintain shame?
You know, I talk what I've seen. I call them seven uh, emotional. It's like a computer program starts running.
Hmm.
And the seven are is the fear of embarrassment, and that's you know I'll run through the fear of embarrassment. Number two is anger, and many times feeling invisible. A big one many people talk about is the imposter syndrome, and we'll get to that. And number four is feeling isolated, fear of rejection. Uh, Number five, many times you see with the men, very suspicious, untrusting of authority. Number six, fear of intimacy. And that's for a lot of guys that may have reckless sex, one night
Hmm.
stands. There's no intimacy there. And number seven is the fear of criticism, that you're going to be judged. You can't tolerate feedback. Any one of those seven can set off like a match, a whole shame reaction, shame cycle.
Hmm.
And I find that what I find very common is anger, feeling invisible. Like guys like, well, he disrespected me. Okay, what does that mean? He disrespected you. I always think, like, dude, what are you talking about?
Right.
Because he didn't say hello to you. Because that comes from I'm not enough. You
Right.
know, like you're in line. I'm at the at the market or something, and my son will say, "That guy disrespected us." Like, what are you talking? I didn't even know, like, who knows? Maybe he's having a bad day, you know? But that's how it starts. That anger comes
Right.
out so many different. I find part the 2 big ones for men is the explosiveness, and you go from there, all of a sudden you said perfectionism. It
Mm,
all comes from a sense of shame, because perfectionism is I'm not good enough,
right.
and if I'm good enough, then I'll feel good, and it may last momentarily, but it doesn't pay the bill, you know?
Yeah.
I always tell
Yep.
guys, you can't outsource your healing. Can't
Right.
outsource it. You gotta do it yourself, you know?
Yeah, and it to me, it's almost like a hamster wheel, right? Like, you're constantly just running around in circles, like
Yes.
perfectionism, for example, right? You're never
Oh,
gonna get it, and then it's just gonna continue to perpetuate itself, right?
and see, and that breeds the rage. You
Yeah.
know, obsessive compulsive personalities, I find many times are shame-driven personalities because they
Mm,
don't if I keep everything straight, then I won't feel anything.
right.
I mean, I've got a guy in his 60s, very obsessive, but he's never dealt with the abuse from his mother. But
Mm,
if he controls everything, he doesn't feel anything. Very
right.
common with men, very
Mhm.
common. And the imposter syndrome is I'm way beyond my pay grade, metaphorically. You know, like they're
Right.
gonna find out I'm not good enough. And that could be I tell you, a lot of guys I said this to the show up dad, David Mendez, that I find a lot of men, it's not they don't wanna be fathers, they don't think they're good enough.
Mm,
So they abdicate the role. I'm not making any excuses for guys not following through. I find a lot of
right.
men come to see me, they don't believe they're good enough. It sounds odd, but, like, they defer to their wife or, the baby mama, and they just kinda almost wash their hands, not because of irresponsibility, lack of response.
Right.
It's more because they feel so shame driven.
Mm,
Like, I don't wanna mess up my kid, so I'm not gonna get involved. I'm like, "Okay, no, we're going the wrong way." The best way to heal shame is exposure. Shame
right.
cannot tolerate exposure, you
Absolutely.
know? You
Yeah.
know, the old analogy, I'll stop here, but shame is like that monster in the closet, you are convinced. Next morning, you open up the closet, you turn the light on, it is a rubber yellow raincoat.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
thought it was a mo no, it's a freaking ready-made, Rubbermaid, raincoat, but in the dark, it looks ominous, and that's what shame
Right.
is. In the dark, it's ominous.
Right, and I think that's such an important distinction, and it almost, when we look at people do that when they run away from their responsibilities, we're quick to judge them
Yep.
and shame them for that as
Mhm.
well. But once you start recognizing that, they're coming from a place of scarcity and not feeling good
Yes.
enough or worthy, it's almost hard not to have compassion and empathy. But the other piece is, I think, with imposter syndrome, it's not only career related or work related, but you often see that in relationships too, where men,
Oh,
if they're in a relationship
yes.
that's going well, they'll immediately
Mhm.
feel like, "Oh, this is too good to be true," or
Yep.
"She's gonna leave me. She's gonna figure out that I'm like not
I'm a dud.
worthy." Yeah,
Go
yeah.
I get to that fear of intimacy, hands down. And under those are all like the numerator event, but the denominator is shame, and for men, I know you know this. When I see guys really raging, I'm always thinking, "I wonder what his dad was like." I know it sounds
Mm,
weird. I saw a guy, uh, it's been, this time of year, at the supermarket before Thanksgiving, and this guy was in line and just laying into this clerk. And this guy, he's a retired guy, he's working, his name is Hal, and this younger man, probably in his early 30s, is just laying into him, but he made a mistake and didn't get his turkey, whole thing. And I said to I couldn't help it. I looked at him, I go, the guy's looking at me like, "Why are you looking at me?" I go, "He didn't mean to do that.
yeah,
He didn't do that to you." The guy's like, taken back. I go, "He didn't do that. How
right.
that was not he didn't do that to you. That was not on purpose." Oh, you can just feel the wind just It was purposeful. It was done on purpose. And this poor guy, he's just working there, he's, just trying to make a good living. But
Right.
that's rage. And that rage comes from not like we we distort events as if we're doing them,
Right. Right.
as if they're being done to us. I'm going to go back to
Mhm.
intimacy. That is number 2. I see guys blow up more relationships or become abusive verbally.
Mm.
Physical is shame. That's like you're going way up the scale because
Right.
after the physical abuse comes violence. Not that physical isn't violent. When I say I'm talking gun violence. I'm talking like fatal,
Right. Mhm.
that rage. So it all escalates. Like got the supermarket, maybe a 3 and 4, gets home, yells at his partner, 5 or 6, then has road rage, now we're to 10.
Yeah.
And that's all, Thursday afternoon.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. For sure. For sure.
Hasn't even snowed yet, you
Yeah.
know?
When I think part of it is, I mean, to your point, there's that aspect of unhealed wounds that we haven't
Mm,
dealt with that we project onto other people and we personalize. But I think there's also and I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but there's
yeah.
probably an aspect of things that we don't like about ourselves, and then when we see it in others, it's easier
Mm,
for us to get angry with others about those things and judge them because we're
yes,
too afraid to look at it ourselves in the mirror and heal that part, right? And I think
absolutely.
that also comes from shame as well.
Right on. That project you just self-loathing is shame-based.
Mhm.
Raging, self-loathing, and the fear of intimacy are all shame-driven behaviors. Shame is fueling those. And the self-loathing is if she gets close enough to me, not gonna like me, you
Mhm.
know? And when we see those qualities in someone else, we may be very critical of them. But, in Eastern psychology, they say if we're triggered by somebody, that's our issue.
Yeah,
There's our blind that's our blind spot. And it's never not been true. I know it's poor grammar, but Carl Jung, that's one of his major premises.
right,
If you as men, if we're triggered at that guy at work, at school, our neighbor, I'm like, "Oh, okay, I don't like that in me." I
right.
tell that to guys,
Yep.
"It's
Yeah,
in
and I
you."
mean,
Oh,
yeah, and
it's brutal.
for sure, and I think the Stoic philosophy talks about that too. I mean, I've,
Mhm,
read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and he
mhm.
touches on that too, right? The second you're angered, that's become your problem. It has nothing to do with the
Do
other
with it.
person. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of time and work to figure that out, but I think once you do, you're able to navigate through life in a much different way. At least that's been my experience.
You know,
For
and absolutely, people ask me, "Why do you talk about shame?" Because at the end of the day, we want peace,
Mhm.
inner peace with meditation, and part of our journey, life journey, is clearing these logs off the road.
Right,
And meditation helps us being mindful, conscious, helps us to not to react, but start to respond.
right.
Like the guy the other day reacting to that he didn't get his turkey sale or, they didn't have the right one. I don't know what he was reacting to, but it was intense. I kept thinking, this is not going the right direction.
Right. Well, but then if you take a step back and you kind of again practice that compassion and empathy,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying this to excuse people's behavior, but I'm just
Mm-mm.
maybe thinking about this person you're using as an example. For him, it's probably like if he shows up at home with, without the
Mhm.
turkey or if it's not proper, he's probably worried that his wife's gonna think he's again not good enough, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
failed at the
Mhm.
simple task.
Absolutely. And that's what it gets back to. And w part of our that we always talk what's your inner narrative?
Mhm.
And shame takes it to you're not good enough. I don't care where you start the narrative, you end up at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, 7
Right.
miles down. It is a tough walk up, but that's where it takes you. That inner narrative, whatever it is, some other if I was good enough, that wouldn't be happening.
Mhm.
No, no, it's just a speed bump.
Right.
It's a speed bump. It's
Right.
the saying, it's not so much what happens to you, it's how you react to what's happening. And shame distorts your ability to react.
Right.
In sports, the analogy would be your your hamstrings don't work right. You just can't respond the way you would like to.
Mm.
And the game of life is out of balance for you.
Right. Right.
Another
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
another thing I want to get into with shame is a lot of women are saying to their husbands, their boyfriends or fiancés, you got to do something with your anger. You got to do something
Mm.
with your mood swings. I had a guy come in yesterday, says to me, I don't believe in therapy. I go, well, I didn't know you needed to believe in therapy. I didn't know it was a belief system. I go, do you believe in feeling better? Yeah. Do you believe in working out? Yeah. Do you believe, you know, making the most of your life? Yeah. That's therapy. Oh, literally, like, oh, it's not one flew over the cuckoo's nest, like, that's a whole nother, God bless those people. They need that. But we're talking mainstream guys. Therapy is your emotional, your physical, your relational, your spiritual. It's the whole pie chart,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, no, and it's funny you mentioned that because, I've had recent conversations with people too around therapy, and it's it's therapy, I think, also triggers people because, again, it's how you frame it in your mind
Right.
and what your subjective experience is with therapy, but a lot of people associate it with failure, and I did at least,
Mhm.
a decade ago, I looked at therapy as a form of failure that you've accepted failure, and now you're going to seek help. And then
Mhm.
that also elicits shame
Right
because
on.
why else would you need to go get help?
It's interesting. What got me into therapy, you have your comfort zones right here. But when
Mhm.
your despair exceeds this level, is when men go get help.
Right.
You know, as uh, my urologist buddy says to me, men come to the doctor for two reasons: a broken arm or their penis doesn't work. Yeah. I go, Dr. Mills, I can't really argue with that. He goes, seriously,
Yeah.
I show up at my office, either they got a limb hanging off or they have erectile dysfunction. That's when I see them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They should have come in
So I
10 miles earlier, but men are that way with emotions. Like, y I know you know that, but a lot of guys, they go to therapy when they get the Dear John note from their wife or their girlfriend or their fiancé. Says, "I'm
Mhm.
done. I'm out of here." It's amazing how they make time to get into your office and start, deep what the hell happened? What the heck happened?
Right.
That's we wanna get out of the and shame will postpone your healing for as long as you allow it.
Right.
You
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
buy into that for a lifetime, many lifetimes, but eventually you gotta pay the bill
For
and
sure.
confront it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I guess to kind of shift gears a little bit, I
Mhm.
know we wanted to touch on how shame and like the whole masculine traits, like, obviously there's a huge issue around what's masculinity, and everyone's got their own
Yeah.
definition. There's people out there who are preaching about masculinity and different forms. There's conflicting ideas out there, but we were talking offline, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
it is driven by shame.
Mhm.
But how are you seeing that showing up in kind of men right now in today's world?
Yeah, it's a great question, Harvey, because I noticed I'm working on a book called New Masculinity, a guidebook to men's mental health. Is
Hmm.
masculinity, there's four corners to a building. Healthy masculinity starts with um, compassion,
Hmm.
empathy, a life plan, and believing something bigger than yourself. Compassion is your ability to think of others. Empathy is that you have the ability to feel what you're feeling. You put those two ingredients in, you have a plan for your life because you know what you want to do. And you also believe in something bigger than yourself. But those two elements, passion and empathy, there won't be a Jeffrey Epstein. You can't exploit women or others because if you like yourself, you're going to like others. And that starts with
Right.
empathy. Because I find a lot of men get into, I call it body masculinity or narcissistic masculinity. And those two elements have never developed in them, empathy or compassion. because narcissistic men are lacking empathy for themselves and others.
Mm-hmm.
It's all on a scale. I'm talking about where it's a relationship problem, where it's
Right.
used, you know, to demean. But all the movements and women enraged with men because those two elements are not in place.
Right.
Empathy and compassion. And compassion is strength. You know,
Right.
being humble is a courageous move. Being arrogant is easy. Humility takes strength. Seriously, that's compassion. And empathy, the ability to like yourself, self-acceptance changes the world.
Right.
Dads teach their boys how to have self-acceptance. They're not taking guns to Walmart.
Right.
They're not taking or to school, you know. And there's a to your point, those two elements, every man has to deal with those two. Because
Mm-hmm.
guys say, I don't know what my life plan is. Well, let's talk about, do you like yourself? And look at me like a lunatic. No, do you like yourself? D How can you feel like you have a purpose if you don't like yourself? I'm
Right.
not talking arrogance, but, like, it's okay to be you. You accept the 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 weaknesses and the strengths, because our greatest strength is our ability to admit our weaknesses. That is
Mm-hmm.
our greatest strength as men. That's our bond.
Right.
Our bonds are weaknesses, not our strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you and I have developed this relationship. That's what men need. They can talk to a guy,
Right.
and
Yeah.
every guy needs 1 or 2 men in his life that really know him, because that builds compassion and empathy,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then
Well, and I think to build on that, I've talked about men's groups where, you're
Mhm,
kind of sitting around and establishing that brotherhood. Because for most of the time, men will hang out with guys they play sports with or go to the bar
mhm,
with. At your point, that's very superficial. So you may think you've got a group of men around you, but they probably don't know the real you, the vulnerable you,
right.
and you're
Yes.
probably not demonstrating aspects of compassion and empathy around them. But that's so crucial that you bring that up because quite often, I guess to explore on that further, when that's not present, how is it being how are men showing up when they're not tapping into their compassion and empathy? And I know you mentioned on around the whole narcissist tendencies, but also there's this aspect of, well, how can I look like a strong person, right?
Right, and that feeds into competition. Men are
Right.
brutal with competition. You know, it could be about money. You know, now that I talk about the wealth masculinity,
Yeah.
because you have a lot of wealth, therefore your masculinity is in check.
Right.
It's they're absolutely and they're not related. One doesn't relate to the other, you know?
Right.
Because, uh, because wealth many times is a bravado, you know, because men that are superficial outside themselves are seeking 2 things, power and status.
Mhm.
We know that through the
Right.
ages. Power and status are, vacuous. But with compassion and empathy, you can have those 2, but they're
Right.
balanced.
Yeah.
I'm not saying those 2 are they're not evil at all, but out of balance, they're problematic.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, and it can also show up as tyranny, right? If you don't have
right.
that power and status checked, and if it's not well balanced, to your point, you become a tyrant.
Tyrant. I don't know, another thing you mentioned, like, you know, football season, baseball season, it's great to have guys you bond with. No
Mhm.
argument. But you've gotta have a couple guys in your life that you go below the waterline.
Right.
They know metaphorically, I always say, they know where the dead bodies are buried. You know, they know your secrets in a good way.
Yeah.
You know what you're struggling with, or maybe you're watching too much porn, you tell them about it, okay?
Right.
Or you've been gambling too much and you need some accountability, or you've been drinking too much,
Yep.
or you wanna lose 10 pounds. This is what the brotherhood's about.
Right.
And sports is a good start because, I mean, let's say we all like, the NFL or hockey. That's a good but
Right.
it can't stop there. There's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with the third party activity, but taking it a little bit deeper, that's what changes men.
Right.
And guys, like yourself, when you have a good connection with a couple of your buddies, what a breath of fresh air,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I
right?
mean,
Fills
it's
your
it's
it's incredible.
it's so valuable because I think once you can trust another man, or
Oh,
you have that brotherhood, you're able to even seek out
mm,
advice because quite often we have our own blind spots, right? And
Well, that's a
um,
big point. Can
yeah,
we'll come back to that. Let's bookmark blind spots.
okay,
Yeah,
sounds
because
good.
your buddy may see everyone's I've got him. We all have them.
Yeah,
Your buddy, because you know he's got your back, and maybe a childhood friend, maybe a colleague you met, but
hmm,
they're in. There's these groups, weekend warrior groups for men. I I have no judgment. I love them. I think it's great, but they're spending $15,000, $20,000 for a weekend to get that bond. But the problem is, you can do it in a weekend, but it takes time. You've got to really make a commitment to the compassion and empathy part of your life.
right.
And it has nothing to do with your career. I got guys
Mhm.
that are plumbers, I got guys who are surgeons. They get these two things going, everything goes better.
Right,
Their kids
right.
like them better, their partners, their family, grandparents. You're calmer. You're more
Hmm.
effective. You're
Yeah, and
more
I think
effective.
part of that competition also for men, I believe,
Oh,
often from a place of scarcity, right? And to your point earlier,
mm,
men want to establish this dominance hierarchy. But I think a lot of it is from a place of scarcity because they don't
yeah.
have enough love for themselves, or to your
Yes.
point, they
Inferior.
probably don't like themselves. Yeah.
I tell you, uh, in the Eastern spirituality, they view, or Eastern psychology, competition as a character flaw,
Mm,
as a liability. They put on the same law as addiction. This whole
right.
thing, you got to beat somebody. That's not the way of of a warrior. I mean, a warrior doesn't have to beat anybody. He leads people, doesn't beat them.
Right. Yeah.
And a couple of my buddies, I used to have season tickets with them to college football team out here in Los Angeles. And he calls me up a number of years, goes, "Hey, Steve, I can't participate anymore." I'm like, "What?" Like, "What are you talking about? We go to the games?" He goes, "I can't endorse beating other people."
Mm.
I'm like, "Oh, Barry," because I knew eventually I'd have to join him in that. Because I knew it's like I can't turn you can't unsee that, all right?
Right.
But competition, again, in balance, right?
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
I may be competitive with some jogging, not to beat them, but to make myself better.
Right.
That's where it can be helpful, all
Mhm.
right? But it's when I'm doing it to put that other guy down, now we got a problem. I know
Right.
people I know a lot of guys say to me, "Okay, don't go rainbows and unicorns on me." I mean, like, don't become no, that takes courage to
Right.
encourage other men. That's what builds men. When a guy you have a buddy, I have a buddy that we feel wants our best, we'll we'll go to hell and back to support them.
Right.
How's that
Mhm.
competition? No, it's everything the opposite of competition, which is support
Mhm. Right.
and empowerment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, what I appreciate about for people that don't watch NHL or the ice hockey here in
Yeah.
North America, at the end of the playoff series, the players line up and shake each other's hands. Like, you put it all
Yeah.
on the ice, you compete with each other, but at the end of the day, you still have that mutual
Brotherhood.
respect. Yeah, and you
Mhm.
admire each other for the effort you put in, but, you're not leaving the game saying, "Oh,
Mm.
I'm better than him." It's like, "No, you
Right.
beat me today, tomorrow I'll get to beat you, but we'll have
Yeah.
this respect for each other," right? And
You
I
know,
think that's the competition.
I can't say enough. There my wife and I, went to the USC-UCLA game last week. Big college
Mhm.
football game and huge rivalry, and I literally wore neutral colors. I didn't wear this, okay? I literally wore a black sweatshirt, because it was cold. Because I told my wife, "I just wanna go watch the game. I don't wanna get in an argument with the other side."
Right.
And this one woman, her team was losing, and she started I'll just say, she called my wife the C word,
Oh, wow.
and I went, "Oh." I just went I'm like, "Okay, we just gotta go." We're and and walking away, my wife goes, "She doesn't like herself." I go, "No, you don't do that when you feel good about yourself. Yeah, you're
Mhm.
disappointed, you want your team to win, but in Los Angeles, there's been these horrible murders, like at a Dodger game. I mean, when I talk about murder, I mean like someone beat almost to their death because they're a Giants fan.
Mm,
And I go, guys, that's when the shame is out of control.
right.
There's so much despair inside of you that if your team doesn't win, you're awful.
Right.
To your point, I don't mean to get on a tangent, but I love hockey, and I love when the guys line up, shake hands, give each other a hug after the game.
Yeah.
See, that's the
Yeah.
brotherhood.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not and that after the SC game, the guys all, you know, congregated in the middle of the field, shaking hands. The fans aren't. There's
Hmm.
fights in the parking lot and knuckleheads. And this woman's calling my wife C word. I look at my wife, go, we just got to go. Like, we got to get
Yeah.
out of
Yeah.
here. Because she had never seen anything like that. She was, I can't believe people do this. Because she wasn't raised around sports. She was from England. And I go, no. I go, I can't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to
No,
your point, men who like themselves, mentors, because there's a young man around, regardless of age, who wants three things every man wants, every guy wants. Feel accepted. Accept is, I like you. But number two, understood.
mm,
When you feel understood by your buddy, I mean, it's walking downhill.
right.
And number three, love. And love is, I'm going to hang with you. You don't need
Yeah.
to be perfect.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
are the big three.
Well, and I think that's kind of the whole idea of connection, that
Mm-hmm.
Brene talks about too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Feel seen, valued, and heard, right?
Yep.
And
And
and that's all we all want as humans, right? Is that human connection.
connection. And see, what Ren- I love what Brene Brown, she's reaching an audience that you and I aren't going to reach. And we want to get
Yeah.
to guys, and I love that she does. And when Wayne Dyer and John Bratch, shame is a corrosive, it breaks the connection.
Mhm.
It's rust. The connection it's not as solid.
Yeah.
And dealing with our shame, like, God, why do I get so mad when my team loses? Like,
Mhm.
because on some level, I'm not enough.
Right.
I always tell guys, like, your team lost the Super Bowl. Why did you get so mad? You know what? In
Yeah.
America, that is the number one day for domestic violence. Super Bowl Sunday, the number one day.
Wow.
And when I was a police officer years ago, Super Bowl Sunday was busier than New Year's Eve
Wow.
in terms of calls, fights,
Yeah.
shootings, because your team didn't win.
Mhm.
Invariably, wasn't because your team won. We didn't go to those houses. Went to the houses where your team lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terrible. And so many women hold their breath when their husband's team loses,
Mhm.
whether it be NASCAR, hockey, or World Cup soccer right now.
Yeah.
Your country didn't win. There's a lot, you know. I tell my client, if you're going to a bar to watch a game, you better make sure you're with the same group of people, whether you're rooting for England, Canada, I wouldn't go mix it up.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting, how people respond with sports, and I think so much of I mean, I used to be a diehard fan for hockey. I've taken a kind of a step back for personal reasons, but, I
Yes.
think a lot of our identity is associated with these teams, and, it's very interesting because I think part of it is, again, we're seeking connection, and by having our
Yes.
identity tied up with this team, we connect with other fans, or it's almost like we worship this team, but it's probably better extending that worship elsewhere, right? So,
Right on.
something
That's
I'm trying to
great.
figure out.
Just Harvey, like, I love what you just said, right? It is connection. Like, I have some buddies who are diehard Dodger fans, and we'll
Mhm,
text each other and lament that our coach made the bad call, or something, but it gets us talking.
mhm.
It gets us talking. So how's your cancer treatment? It gets us talking. I tell
Right,
guys, let's sports. That's a great introduction. That's like walking through the front door. But once you're inside the house, let's start talk. me.
Mhm.
You're like, what are you doing with your health? I got a buddy, he's getting his PhD. How's that coming? You
Right.
know, because he wants to teach. But we'll talk about Dodger baseball first.
Yeah, it's just the
talk, yeah, talk smack. But but guys, that's okay. It's a great warm up. You
right.
know,
Right.
it's a great, and that's what you said about like you and I talking. I love the connection.
Mhm.
I feel empowered.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for that, and I'm just being mindful of time here as we come to an end,
Yes,
but I
I
do
know we've been going all over, but thank you.
No, no, this was great. I appreciate you taking the time and coming on
My
here and
pleasure.
sharing your experience with us and your wisdom. But for listeners that do wanna get a hold of you, what are some ways they can do that?
Uh, Stephen Poulter.com or the shame factor. I have a website. I'm in Los Angeles. I do glad to talk to people on the phone, like what we're doing. I'm accessible. You can find me.
Yeah,
And
no,
then
and I'll put all that in the show
yeah,
notes. Yeah.
and when it comes up, I'll put the show on my website. And last, I just want to leave guys with this, or wives that are listening to this. If your husband or boyfriend's struggling and you don't know what to do, focus on understanding them.
Mm,
Just focus on trying to understand them.
mhm.
Now, it may take time, but it'll help unravel the seemingly impossible mess.
Mm,
But that's what I do when I work with guys. I try to understand them. And they when someone feels understood, a lot of things open up.
right.
It saves marriages, children, so many good things come out of that. That's why wives, you got your husband, your boyfriend, he's struggling. Rather than tell him what to do, which doesn't go well for anybody, if they feel understood, they're going to hear you.
Mm,
When you feel understood, you can take a lot of good stuff in.
yeah. Yeah, for
The,
sure.
the wall's lower.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
walls.
yeah, and
you
I
know.
think it goes both ways. I think for men too, like just
Mm,
put what you need on the table, because you can't
yeah.
expect the other person to figure it out or read your mind,
No.
right?
Right. Well, that's a big one in relation. Mind reading. Like that's like I put that up with adultery. I mean, infidelity, mind reading, infidelity, like on the same parallel, because
Yeah.
both of them lead to a crisis.
Yep. Yeah.
But thank you
No,
so much. My pleasure to be with you, and I appreciate what you're doing for us in the brotherhood out here.
no, I appreciate that very much. So thank you again. And I'm sure we'll be talking more in the future.
All right. All right. Take care. All
You
right.
too. Thank you for checking out this episode with Dr. Stephan Poulter. This was the last episode of 2022. Thank you for tuning in all year long. The next episode will be next week, which will be the first one for 2023. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, and always feel free to leave a comment. I always love hearing from you. Thank you.